Wyoming Territory, September 1880. The wind screamed across the high plains as if it mourned something lost, and Callum McRae reined in his horse just outside the burnt-out remains of the Finch homestead. Smoke still curled from the last of the embers. The barn was gone, the house half standing. He dismounted without a word, boots crunching over broken glass and scorched earth. His rifle stayed low, though his eyes swept the land like he expected something to leap from the shadows. A soft cry stopped him cold. It came from the root cellar, a slab of wood half covered in ash. He dropped to one knee, shoved it open, and stared down into the face of a wide-eyed boy, no older than 6, clutching a baby girl wrapped in smoke-stained quilts. The boy blinked up at him. "Mama said not to come out till someone kind came." Callum's throat tightened. "You listen real good, kid." He reached down and pulled them both up, steady but gentle. The boy stood on his own, jaw set. The baby stirred against him, eyes fluttering open. She could not have been more than a year old. "Name's Kellen," the boy said, voice hoarse. "She's Kaya. Mama, she told us to hide when the men came. His small voice cracked. Callum laid a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You are safe now, I promise." A movement near the wreckage caught his eye. Someone limped from behind the remnants of the stone chimney, skirts torn, hair tangled, blood trailing down her temple. She leaned on a broken fence post like it was the only thing holding her up. He recognized her even before she looked up. "Georgia," he said, stunned. Her eyes met his. "Callum." He took 2 steps forward and caught her before she crumpled. "I thought you were dead," she whispered, fingers clenching his coat sleeve. "I could say the same," he breathed. He carried her to the only upright part of the house left, what used to be the back wall of the kitchen. It gave them shade and shelter from the wind. He laid her down carefully, checked her for worse wounds, then unrolled his bedroll for the children. Kellen stayed close, eyes fixed on his mother. "Are you their father?" Callum asked quietly. She shook her head. "Their pa died last winter. Fever took him fast. I buried him myself." Callum exhaled slowly. "That was not bandits, was it?" "No," her voice was tight. "Men from Lander, drunk off their pay. Someone said I had food stored. They came for it. I gave them everything. They wanted more." Callum went still. Fury burned in his chest, but he swallowed it. "You do not need to say more." She looked up at him with tired eyes. "I kept the children hidden. That was all I cared about." He stood and stoked the small fire he had started. The sun was dipping low. They needed to make camp and move in the morning. He looked at Kellen, who sat beside his baby sister, one hand gently keeping her from rolling. Callum walked over, crouched down, and met the boy's eyes. "Your mama is going to heal, and I am going to take care of you and Kaya." He paused, heart heavy but certain. "I will be your father, Kellen, for as long as I am breathing." The boy looked at him, long and quiet. Then he nodded, just once. That night Callum sat beside the fire. Georgia stirred, wrapped in blankets, the firelight catching the curve of her cheek. Her eyes fluttered open and found him. "You are still here," she said softly. "I am not going anywhere. I never thought I would see you again." "I came back 2 months ago," he said. "My brother died in a cattle stampede. I took over the ranch. I was going to come see you. Then I heard rumor about a widow out this way trying to make it alone. Something told me it was you." Georgia blinked back tears. "It was." He shifted closer, careful not to crowd her. "We grew up side by side. I always knew you were the strongest person I ever met." She gave a small, broken laugh. "I do not feel strong. You kept your children alive. That is more than most could do." She looked at him, really looked. "And what do you want, Callum McRae?" He reached out, brushed a strand of soot-streaked hair from her forehead. "To see you safe, to give those children a home, and if you will let me, to stay." Her breath hitched. "I do not know if I can love again." "I am not asking for anything tonight," he said. "Only this, let me stay." She nodded, slow and sure. The fire crackled. The baby whimpered. Georgia sat up, wincing, and Callum helped her cradle Kaya. The child quieted in her arms, and Kellen leaned against her side. Callum sat beside them, his shoulder brushing hers, and for the first time in a long while, Georgia Finch felt like maybe, just maybe, they had not lost everything. And Callum. He looked at the woman he had once kissed under a summer apple tree when they were 17, and he knew in his bones. He was not just staying for the children. He was staying for her. By dawn, the wind had quieted. A thin frost clung to the prairie grass, brittle and silver. Callum stirred the embers with the toe of his boot and coaxed the fire back to life. Kellen still slept, curled around his sister like a small sentinel. Georgia lay nearby, her breathing slow and even. She hadn't spoken again after her quiet agreement the night before, but her hand had stayed in his when sleep finally took her. He brewed coffee in a dented tin pot, the scent curling into the morning air. Georgia woke slowly, her first glance going straight to her children, then to him. "Is that real coffee?" she asked, voice rough with sleep. "Not the worst I've ever made," he said, pouring her a tin cup. "You up for riding?" She sat up, moved her shoulder, winced once. "I can manage. There's a line shack a few miles west, belonged to the Tanners." They moved on, left it standing. "I keep it stocked when I'm riding fence out that way. It's not much, but it's dry and it's got a stove." Georgia took a careful sip. "How long till we get there?" "By sundown if we go steady." She looked over at the children. "Kaya can't ride that long. I've got a pack frame. She can ride up with me. Kellen can sit behind you. We'll go slow." She nodded and set the cup down. "Then we'd better get moving." They broke camp without fuss. Georgia moved like her limbs weren't quite trusting her yet, but she didn't complain. She wrapped Kaya in a wool shawl and kissed the top of her head. Kellen helped gather the last of the blankets, serious and silent. Callum saddled his mare and secured the pack frame. Kaya fussed once when he lifted her, but he murmured something low and steady near her ear, and she settled against his chest like she'd done it before. They rode west, the land stretching out in gold and rust. Antelope scattered ahead of them now and then, and once they passed a fallen cottonwood, its trunk split by lightning. Callum pointed out a hawk overhead, and Kellen turned in the saddle to watch it, eyes wide. Georgia spoke only once on the trail. "I never asked how long were you gone." "6 years," he said. "Longer than I meant to be." And now, he looked ahead, toward the low ridge that marked the edge of the Tanner land. "Now I don't aim to leave again." They reached the shack just before the sun dipped behind the hills. It leaned a little to the south, but the roof was whole and the chimney still drew. Callum swung down first, handed Kaya to Georgia, then helped Kellen down. Inside, it was dust-heavy but intact. A rusted stove stood in the corner with a small stack of split wood beside it. He opened the shutters. The light caught in Georgia's hair as she stepped across the threshold. "I remember this place," she said, brushing a hand across the doorframe. "Used to be whitewashed. Paint peeled off after the first winter," Callum said. "But the bones are good." Kellen found a tin pail and went to fetch water from the spring downhill. Georgia watched him through the open door, arms folded. "He doesn't speak much unless he has to," she said. "Not since the fever took his pa." "He'll find his way," Callum said. "You both will." She turned toward him. "Why are you doing this, Callum?" He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Because I want to. That's not reason enough." "Maybe not, but it's the truth." He looked at her, really looked. "I left to prove something, thought I had to carve out a name. Got out there and found nothing worth the years I lost. What's left of me belongs here, with you, with them." George's mouth trembled just slightly. "You don't know what we've been through." "No," he said. "But I aim to learn." She didn't speak again, just stepped past him and began clearing out the stove. He joined her. They worked without words for a while until Kellen returned with the water. Then Georgia cooked cornmeal cakes with the last of the flour he'd brought from his saddlebag, and they ate with their backs to the wall, watching the fire glow in the stove's grate. Later, when the children slept tucked together on a straw pallet, Callum sat beside Georgia on the porch step. The moon rode high above the ridge, silvering the scrub and grass. "I've still got scars," she said softly, fingers laced in her lap. "Not all of them show." "I'm not afraid of scars," Callum said. "I've got my own." She turned to him, her profile etched in moonlight. "You mean to stay?" "I meant every word I said by that fire," she nodded once. "Then you'd best be ready. Kellen's stubborn as they come." Callum smiled, slow and quiet. "Good. He'll need that." Georgia leaned her shoulder against his, and for the first time since the smoke rose behind them, she let herself rest. Callum watched the land stretch out before them and felt something settle in his chest that hadn't been there in years. Something like home. The wind shifted east 2 days later, brushing through the cottonwoods behind the line shack and carrying the scent of drying sage. Callum stood at the edge of the small pasture, hammering the last plank into place on a makeshift corral. The mare grazed nearby, her reins looped loosely around a post. He paused to wipe his brow, eyes tracking movement at the cabin door. Georgia stepped out barefoot, her skirts pinned up past her ankles, a tin basin in one hand. Her hair was still damp from washing, pulled into a hasty braid that hung down her back. The morning sun caught the purpling bruise along her forearm, but she moved with more steadiness than she had when they'd arrived. "You're building fences now?" she asked, voice light with curiosity. He nodded. "I figured it'd be easier to keep the mare close. That pasture's got good grass. Long as we're here, might as well use it." He set the hammer down. "What about you? You look like you're headed somewhere with purpose." Kellen's trousers were near worn through. "I found a scrap of canvas in the root cellar, thought I'd see if it could be coaxed into patches." Callum leaned on the fence rail. "Need help?" She narrowed her eyes, amused. "You know how to stitch canvas?" "No," he admitted. "But I can chase Kaya while you do." That drew a quiet laugh from her. "You've got yourself a deal." Inside, the cabin had warmed with the sun. The children played near the hearth, Kaya stacking wooden blocks Callum had carved in the evenings, Kellen fashioning a slope for marbles from tin scraps and pine shavings. Georgia set her sewing near the window, where the light fell in long strips across the floor. Callum crouched beside Kaya, picking up a block she dropped. "You've got an engineer's hands, little miss. Reckon you'll be building barns by 6. "She's strong," Georgia said without looking up. "Like her brother." Callum watched Kaya press her tiny hand into the dirt patch she'd made on the floor. "They've had to be." Georgia's needle pierced canvas with steady rhythm. "He still wakes in the night sometimes. Doesn't cry, just sits up and listens." "I used to think he was waiting to hear his father's voice again." Callum didn't respond right away. He sat back, legs stretched out, and looked over at the boy. "What do you think he hears now?" "Footsteps. The creak of the stove, you, me, Kaya breathing." "I think he's trying to decide if it's safe to sleep all the way through." "I'll keep walking heavy then," he said, and that time her fingers paused at the thread. She glanced over. "You mean it, don't you?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." Georgia looked back to her stitching, but there was something new in the set of her shoulders. Not ease, but the beginning of it. That evening, a thundercloud rolled in from the west, heavy with the smell of rain. Callum brought the mare into the corral just as the first drops landed. Georgia had lit the lantern by the window, its glow soft against the dusk. Kellen helped gather firewood under the overhang while Callum split kindling. When the boy handed him a bundle of twigs, Callum nodded once. "You're good at that," Kellen shrugged. "I'm used to doing things, I can tell." They stacked the wood by the stove, and after a beat, Kellen asked, "Did you chop wood when you were a boy, all the time?" "My pa had a bad leg. I started splitting kindling when I was smaller than you." The boy was quiet a moment, then said, "I don't remember my father's voice too well." Callum looked at him. "That's all right. You remember what matters." Kellen nodded, then turned back to the fire. Later, after the children were asleep and the storm whispered through the trees, Georgia poured 2 cups of boiled coffee and handed one to Callum. They sat across from each other in the hush, the only sound the stove ticking as it cooled. "I got a letter once," she said at last. "From your sister. After you left. She said you were working cattle in Texas, then Arizona. Said you never stayed long in one place." "I didn't," he said. "Didn't want to." "What changed?" He looked at her, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "Figured out what I was running from. And what I should have been running toward." She set her cup down. "And what was that?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and drew out a worn scrap of paper. He passed it to her. It was a drawing, old, creased, done in charcoal. A girl beneath an apple tree, her braid loose, her eyes laughing. Georgia stared at it. "You kept this?" "Every trail I rode, it came with me." She traced her thumb over the edge. "I remember that day. You dared me to climb higher than you." "You did," he said. "And then you fell and twisted your ankle, and I carried you 2 miles back to your folks. I told you not to touch me, and then you held onto my neck the whole way back." His voice went quiet. "I should have stayed. You didn't know what you needed then. I do now." He watched her, steady and sure. "I'll be his father for as long as I'm breathing, Georgia." The tears that came were silent, and she didn't brush them away. Callum rose, crossed the space between them, and knelt beside her chair. His hand found hers, rough meeting rough, neither of them soft people anymore. "If you'll have me," he said. She didn't speak, just curled her fingers around his. And in the hush that followed, with the storm fading into the distance, something settled between them, not loud, not sudden. Just sure. By the end of October, the cottonwoods had dropped their last leaves, and the wind came colder off the high ridges. A dusting of snow clung to the shaded places, though the days still held a brittle light. The line shack had grown quieter, less from uncertainty, more from the rhythm of knowing what each day asked. The morning began with Kellen splitting kindling while Callum showed him how to brace the axe properly. Georgia kept to the kitchen corner, shaping dough into small rounds, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. Kaya babbled near her feet, tugging at a knotted rag doll Georgia had stitched from scrap muslin. "That's your 3rd batch this week," Callum said, leaning against the doorframe once Kellen had gone to stack the kindling outside. Georgia didn't look up. "You complainin' about fresh bread? Just wondering if you're planning to trade." She nodded once. "There's a family 3 miles east, Mayors. They've got chickens, and I've got more flour than eggs. Figured it was time." Callum crossed the room, took a seat at the table. "You want me to go with you? I can manage a short ride," she said, dusting her hands on her apron. "I need to start doing more than just getting through the day." He nodded. "You need anything fixed before you go?" "Only the saddle's cinch. It's loosening on the right side." He stood. "I'll see to it." She paused, then reached for a tin from the shelf. "They've got a daughter about Kellen's age. Might be good for him to see another child." Callum glanced toward the door. "He's been quieter since the frost came. He misses having something that's just his," she said. "Not survival, not duty, just the kind of joy that doesn't require permission." Callum met her eyes. "We'll give him that. One step at a time." By midday, the saddle cinch was mended, the bread bundled into a flour sack, and Georgia was mounted with Kaya secured against her chest in a wrap of thick wool. Kellen stayed back with Callum, watching them disappear along the narrow trail between the cottonwoods. "She'll be back before supper," Callum said. Kellen didn't answer, just carried the rag doll Kaya had dropped and set it gently on her cot. "You ever help with livestock before?" Callum asked. Kellen shrugged. "I helped Ma with the goats. She had two, one died in the spring." Callum nodded. "You want to come with me down to the creek? Got a few traps set that need checking. Might be a rabbit caught." The boy considered it, then nodded. "All right." They walked the half-mile in silence, boots crunching over frozen grass. The stream was low but still ran clean, and one of the snares had indeed caught a rabbit. Kellen crouched beside it, frowning as Callum knelt to dispatch it quickly. "You ever done this?" Callum asked. Kellen shook his head. "Pa said I was too young." "Well, you're not now." "You want to learn how to clean it?" There was a pause. Then, yes. They worked side by side on a flat stone. Callum kept his movements slow, letting the boy watch each cut, explaining how to keep the meat clean and the pelt intact. Kellen didn't flinch. When they started back, Kellen carried the rabbit in a sling over his shoulder. Halfway up the trail, he asked, "Did you ever want children?" Callum watched the boy's face. "I always figured I might, didn't think it'd happen this way." Kellen nodded. "I think Kaya likes you. I like her too." "And Ma," Callum stepped over a fallen branch, "I've liked her a long time." Kellen looked down at the frozen trail. "She's different since you came, not scared like before." Callum didn't answer right away. Then, "Everyone's got reasons to be afraid. But she's not alone anymore. None of you are." When Georgia returned that evening, her cheeks were pink from the cold and her arms full of eggs wrapped in straw. Kaya had fallen asleep against her, one small hand curled around the edge of the shawl. She dismounted carefully and Callum helped her down. "They remembered me," she said, voice soft with surprise. "Said they wondered if I'd survived the fire." "You tell them you weren't the only one who did," she nodded. "They sent honey, said it's clover-fed." I think they meant it as kindness. Inside, the shack was warm. Kellen laid the rabbit meat near the stove and Georgia handed him a small bag. "From the mayor's girl. She said to keep it secret." He opened it slowly. Inside were 3 marbles, green, blue, and amber. He turned them in his palm like they were glass jewels. Georgia watched him for a moment, then looked at Callum. I think he smiled. "We'll count that as a good day, then." Later, when the children slept, Georgia stood near the shutter, her hand resting on the sill. "I never thought we'd have days like this again," she said. "Neither did I." She turned toward him. "I've been thinking about winter. I've got extra stores at the McRae place. Salt pork, beans, barley. If we ride out in a day or two, we could bring back what we need." "I wasn't just thinking about food," she said, her voice low. "I was thinking we shouldn't come back to the shack after." Callum stepped closer. "You want to stay with me?" "I want a roof that doesn't lean. I want Kellen to have a bed that won't freeze through by December. I want you." She didn't reach for him, but her words held steadier than her breath. "You sure?" he asked. "I've never been more." He reached out, resting his hand against her waist. "Then we'll go together. You, me, the children. That place is meant for more than one man's silence." She leaned into him, just enough to close the space. "I'm not the girl from under the apple tree anymore." "I know," he said. "The woman you are now, she's who I've waited for." And in the hush between the stove's soft ticking and the wind curling around the eaves, Georgia laid her hand over his and held it there, like a vow. The wagon creaked under its load as it rolled slow and steady across the frozen stretch between the foothills and the McRae homestead. Callum walked beside the team, one gloved hand steadying the lead horse's flank. The sky overhead was the flat gray of early winter, and the breath from the horses rose in ghostly plumes. Georgia sat on the wagon bench, reins in hand, Kaya bundled against her chest beneath a quilted shawl. Kellen rode beside them on the mare, his back straight, eyes forward. They hadn't spoken much since morning, but the quiet between them had grown companionable, weighted more by purpose than hesitation. The McRae ranch house came into view just past the line of fir trees, 2 stories of weathered pine boards and a wraparound porch, the roof patched with new shingles from Callum's last repairs. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the barn doors stood open, waiting. "You sure the place is ready?" Georgia asked, her voice tight with the cold. "It's not polished, but it's warm. Roof holds. Water pumps working. Got the back room cleaned out for the children. Thought we'd start there." She gave a small nod. "And the rest? I'll clear space for whatever you want to bring in. We'll make the place ours a little at a time." She glanced at Kellen, then back to him. "He's never had a room with a door before. He'll sleep easy tonight." Inside, the house smelled of pine soap and hearth ash. Callum had scrubbed the floors and dusted the sills, but he'd left the hand-carved rocking chair by the hearth untouched, the one his father had built for his mother before the war. Georgia ran her hand across its worn armrest, then looked toward the back hallway where the children's room waited. Kaya stirred in her shawl, and Georgia unwrapped her slowly, laying her in the cradle Callum had repaired from the attic. The baby blinked up at the low ceiling, then reached for a beam overhead with soft, uncertain fingers. Kellen stood in the doorway, taking in the room a narrow bed, a shelf with a few books, a wool blanket folded at the foot. "You made this space?" he asked Callum. "I did." Kellen stepped in and ran his hand over the smooth wood of the bed frame. "It's good." That night, supper was simple beans stewed with salt pork and cornbread crisp from the stove. They ate around the kitchen table, the oil lamp casting halos across their faces. Kellen ate with quiet focus. Kaya clapped her spoon against the tray Callum had built her, and Georgia sat with her hands folded, watching them both. After the children were asleep, Georgia went to the porch. The wind had stilled and the stars blinked low and sharp above the pines. Callum joined her, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders before settling beside her on the bench swing. "I never saw myself here," she said after a long while. "No. I figured I'd make it through another winter alone. Maybe find work in town when the roads cleared. You were never meant to be alone." She leaned against the side of the swing, her profile lit faintly by the lamp behind the window. "I didn't think I'd be enough for someone, not after everything." "You're more than enough," he said. "You've built a life from ashes. You've raised children who trust you. You've stood through storms that would have flattened most." She turned toward him. "And you," he looked out over the land stretching dark and quiet toward the hills. "I used to think I needed to prove something to the world. Turns out I just needed to come home and do right by the people who matter." She reached for his hand, her fingers bare against his calloused palm. "We're not what we were, no," he said. "We're stronger." The swing rocked gently beneath them. She turned toward him fully then, eyes steady. "Do you want to marry me, Callum McRae?" He didn't blink. "Yes," she raised her eyebrows. "You don't want to think on it." "I've had 6 years to think. I want you. I want the children. I want mornings like today and nights like this." She smiled, slow and certain. "Then I accept." He kissed her with the kind of quiet reverence that belonged to men who didn't waste words. Her hand slid to the back of his neck, anchoring him like the land itself had settled beneath them. They married 2 Sundays later, under the bare-limbed cottonwood behind the house. The local preacher rode out from town, his wife bringing a tin of dried apples and a thick wool blanket as gifts. Kellen wore a clean shirt tucked into trousers Georgia had mended again, and Kaya tossed pine needles into the air from Georgia's arms. The vows were simple. The promises, not. That winter, the snow came heavy, but the house held warm. Callum taught Kellen how to brace fence posts against frost heave. Georgia spun wool at night while Kaya learned to walk in wide, unsteady steps that led her always back to her mother's skirts. In early spring, Georgia planted a row of wild lupine along the front fence. "For color," she said, though Callum noticed she stood longer over the seeds than necessary, her hand lingering in the soil. By summer, the porch bore the shape of their life: Kaya's doll on the step, Kellen's whittling knife on the rail, Georgia's braid loose at the end of the day, her head resting against Callum's shoulder as the sun dropped behind the hills. And when the first apples ripened on the tree they planted together near the barn, Georgia picked one, took a bite, and handed it to Callum with a quiet smile. "Not sweet yet," she said. He looked at her, the children laughing somewhere behind them. "It'll come," he said, and it did.